The dark rumors around Buffy the Vampire Slayer used to rise up, then sink back down. Nobody believed they were real. Because Buffy was never just a TV series. It was part of an entire generation's youth, so we idealized it. But after Nicholas Brendon's passing, something changed. When people dug Buffy back up one more time, what came into view did not feel like simple nostalgia anymore. It felt heavier, darker than that, and a whole lot scarier. A workplace that was accused of being toxic. A young actress who was still a minor and had to ask for help. Buried versions. Strange truths that longtime fans thought they already knew, but really they had only touched the outermost layer. Today, we are going to peel back 20 of the strangest facts around Buffy, the kind of things people used to dismiss as rumors, then bury long enough that even now when you dig them back up, they still give people chills. Number 20. The Buffy episode, pulled off the air. After a real-life tragedy. There are old episodes that feel lighter the farther away you get from their original air date. But there are also episodes that feel even more chilling the more you revisit them. To me, Earshot belongs in that second group. And after Nicholas Brendon's passing, going back to Buffy, I feel the shadow of episodes like this one even more heavily than before. In that episode, Buffy suddenly gains the ability to hear other people's thoughts. On paper, that sounds like a gift. But in Buffy, it turns into a nightmare. All the worry, shame, anger, and despair of an entire school comes crashing into her head all at once. Then, somewhere inside that chaos, Buffy believes a student is about to carry out a school shooting. The episode leads us straight in that direction, then suddenly twists the knife. The person standing there with the gun is not planning to kill the whole school. He is planning to kill himself. Earshot was supposed to air in April of 1999. Then Columbine happened. That alone was enough to change everything. The episode was pulled from the schedule and only aired later out of its original order. What stays with me is not just that it got delayed. It is that Buffy, in one of its rarest moments, saw America's nightmare before America itself really did. And trust me, the strangest things about this series are not always about vampires. Sometimes they are about real people stepping into that world. Let's go straight to secret number 19, and you are going to shiver when you hear what one underage actress had to deal with. Number 19. Eliza Dushku refused a nude scene. While she was still a minor, Faith walked into Buffy like a lit match in a room full of gasoline. She was wild, seductive, reckless, and had that kind of energy that could throw all of Sunnydale off balance in just a few short scenes. That is what the audience saw. What always gives me a chill is that behind that image, the truth was much simpler and a whole lot more uncomfortable. When Eliza Dushku created one of the boldest characters in the series, she was still legally a child. Eliza refused to do a nude scene. Part of that was because she grew up in a Mormon family. But the bigger reason was that she was still a minor. That is the part about late 90s Hollywood that always leaves me both stunned and bitter. On screen, it loved pushing young actresses right up to the edge of adulthood. But in real life, the law still had to stand there and remind everybody, hold on, this girl is not old enough yet. Buffy's shooting schedule was also famous for being long and brutal, to the point that Eliza had to seek emancipation from her parents so she could legally work the number of hours the show demanded. And then the story takes this weird, very Hollywood turn. Eliza said the judge agreed to sign the order if she brought back an autographed photo. It almost sounds funny until you remember what was actually being decided there. Behind a character who lived like she had already been through half a lifetime of darkness was still just a young girl trying to hold on to her boundaries. And trust me, that is only the point where Buffy's backstage curtain starts opening on its ugliest side. Number 18. Charisma Carpenter. Publicly accused Buffy's set of being toxic. There is something deeply uncomfortable about looking back at shows you once loved. It is that moment when you realize the light on screen and the atmosphere behind the camera may have been two completely different stories. With Buffy, that moment came when Charisma Carpenter publicly accused Joss Whedon of abusing his power and helping create a toxic work environment. She described experiences that hurt her during her time in the Buffy and Angel universe, and that story instantly changed the color of the series in people's minds. What made it even heavier was not just the accusation itself. It was that afterward, familiar faces like Sarah Michelle Gellar, Michelle Trachtenberg, Amber Benson, David Boreanaz, and others began speaking up in support of Charisma, or sharing that they had felt something similar about that environment. We were not there to see it with our own eyes, and we should not pretend we have the right to hand down the final verdict for everybody. Number 17. Ryan Reynolds almost took Xander's role. There are some roles where just imagining somebody else playing them already feels wrong. For me, Xander Harris is one of those cases, and that is why every time I remember Ryan Reynolds was once considered for the part, it still feels like we narrowly escaped a huge wrong turn. Not because Ryan Reynolds does not have charm. That is not even up for debate. But Xander did not need a guy who was too polished. He needed that slightly awkward, slightly offbeat quality, the kind of grin that covers insecurity, and that very human feeling in a world full of slayers, vampires, and apocalypse. What makes this fact even scarier is that it was not just tied to one role. Willow was originally recast too, and Allison Hannigan ended up locking in the part partly because of her chemistry with Sarah Michelle Gellar and Nicholas Brendon. In other words, if Xander had been played by someone else, the heartbeat of the whole Scooby Gang could have gone off rhythm from the very beginning. Number 16. Nicholas Brendon turned his stutter into part of Xander's soul. Some actors step into a role through technique. Then, there are the rarer ones who bring their real cracks into the character. Nicholas Brendon was that rarer kind. One thing a lot of viewers did not know for years was that he lived with a stutter, and acting was not just a job for him. It was also a way to keep his own voice standing steady. And once you know that, then look back at Xander Harris, everything suddenly fits in this strange, perfect way. Xander does not have superpowers. He does not have Angel's mystery. He does not have Spike's danger. He is the guy standing in a room full of extraordinary people, trying to survive on humor, loyalty, and that slightly too fast joking style that covers insecurity. That kind of thing is hard to write, honestly. But Nicholas made it honest. That is what I have always appreciated about him. He did not try to turn Xander into some polished hero. He kept him human. And looking back now, especially after he is gone, I feel even more strongly that this was Nicholas Brendon's greatest gift to Buffy. He made the most ordinary member of the group feel completely irreplaceable. Number 15. Joss Whedon walked away while the Buffy movie was still being made. Can you believe this? One of the strangest things about Buffy is that the version audiences ended up loving most was born out of a long stretch of frustration. Before the 1997 series, there was the 1992 movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and in Joss Whedon's head, it was not supposed to be some goofy vampire joke. He wanted to tell the story of a blonde girl monsters would assume was the first victim, only to discover she was actually the one hunting them. That idea was smart, sly, and carried its own very specific sadness. Then Hollywood did what Hollywood always does. It saw something unusual, liked it, bought it, then sanded it down until most of the original strangeness nearly disappeared. Whedon later said outright that his vision had been mishandled, the script had been rewritten too much, and the tone got pulled in a lighter, broader direction than he wanted. In the end, he got so frustrated that he left the set while the movie was still being made and never came back. Number 14. The network almost killed Buffy's craziest name. Want to know one of the strangest things about Buffy's start with the title? Yeah. The very name that sounded the most ridiculous was the first thing the network almost killed. At one point, there were people who wanted to drop Buffy completely and rename the series Slayer. Sounds tighter, cooler, easier to sell, and way more bland. I get why the network guys liked that name. Slayer sounds like a supernatural action show that could air on any random night of the week. But Buffy the Vampire Slayer does not sound like anything else. It is soft weird, a little funny, almost like it sounds wrong right away. And that is exactly why it was right. Joss Whedon understood that perfectly. He kept the title because it did the exact same thing this series always did to the audience. It made you think this was just some weird little genre joke, then suddenly pulled you into Youth Lost Death and the end of the world. If they had changed it to Slayer Buffy, probably still would have survived, but it would have lost that sly little wink that gave it its own soul. And once that weird title stayed in place, the world around it had to be built in ways that were just as strange. That is fact number 13. Number 13, Sarah Michelle Gellar was so afraid of graveyards that Buffy had to build a fake cemetery. One of the most iconic images in Buffy the Vampire Slayer is Buffy standing in a graveyard stake in hand eyes scanning the dark like it belongs to her. So who would believe Sarah Michelle Gellar was actually terrified of cemeteries, and not in some casual playful way either? She was genuinely shaken after scenes where she had to be buried alive or lie inside a grave to the point of throwing up. Honestly, if it were me, I would not want to crawl up out of cold dirt at 2 in the morning just to grab one more camera angle either. What makes this story even better is that it was not just about Sarah's fear. Shooting in a real graveyard was already rough on the whole crew, exhausting, inconvenient, and time-consuming. So Buffy did what Hollywood does best. It turned a very human problem into a very cinematic solution. The crew built a fake cemetery right on the studio lot, and from that point on, one of the most haunting spaces in the whole series was created out of woodlights, fog machines, and a little bit of real fear from the show's lead star. Number 12, legendary Sunnydale. Really started with a warehouse and a hallway. If you grew up with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you remember Sunnydale as a complete world. There was a school, a library, hallways, that feeling of an entire small town sitting right on top of the mouth of hell. That is the thing television does best. It makes our memories feel way bigger than the real physical size of the set. Because the funny truth, and honestly the impressive one too, is that Buffy's first season was shot in a warehouse in Santa Monica, and it basically had just one hallway pretending to be all of Sunnydale High. That was the kind of scrappy, broke reality that used to define American TV back then. There was not enough money to build a whole world, so they bent, camera angles shifted, the lighting changed the direction. Actors walked and made the audience believe this was a living school. For exterior shots, they borrowed Torrance High, and later, some pieces of college life got patched together with UCLA. In other words, Sunnydale was such a skillful patchwork that a whole generation still remembers it like it was a real place they once lived in. Number 11. Buffy had to turn vampires into monsters, so the audience would not feel like she was killing people. There was a really hard problem Buffy the Vampire Slayer had to solve, and I have always thought this was one of the smartest fixes American television ever came up with. If the vampires in the series kept looking completely human all the time, sooner or later, the audience would have to ask itself a very uncomfortable question. Are we cheering for a teenage heroine, or are we sitting here watching a high school girl drive wooden stakes through people's chests every week? So Buffy did something that was both simple and kind of genius. The show gave vampires their monster face right when they became most dangerous. That one visual change instantly made the line between human and monster much clearer. The audience no longer saw Buffy killing some guy who looked like your neighbor. They saw her fighting something that had already crossed the line out of being human. Number 10. Buffy did not want Xander too built. So Brendon had to stop working out. There is something really funny about television, and Buffy is a perfect example of it. Hollywood does not just create heroes. A lot of the time it has to create normalcy too. Xander Harris was always the very human guy in the Scooby Gang. No superpowers, none of Angel's mystery, none of Spike's dangerous presence. He was the friend standing in the middle of all that extraordinary stuff and still looking like a regular person from real life who somehow wandered into the apocalypse. And because of that, Brendon was not allowed to get too muscular. The producers told him to stop training because they did not want Xander to look too built. It sounds a little harsh, but it also tells you something sharp about how Buffy worked. This series understood exactly what each character needed to make you feel the second you looked at them. If Xander looked too toned, too confident, or too polished, he would instantly lose that slightly offbeat quality that made up his soul. Number 9. Willow secretly kept Buffy's bones and tombstone as Halloween decorations. Some actors leave a set with a photo, a small gift, maybe a jacket that hangs in the closet for years. Allison Hannigan was different. She brought home a very Buffy piece of Buffy itself. Not something neat or shiny either. A tombstone, fake bones, props that looked like they had just been pulled straight out of Sunnydale Cemetery and the Master's lair. It is weird, sure, but this is exactly the kind of thing Buffy would do. Willow was the one who got more and more tied to magic darkness and the things sitting between life and death as the series went on. Then, in real life, Allison became the one who literally kept some of the show's remains, pulling them out as Halloween decorations like Buffy had never really left her house. Number 8. The girl who loved Buffy walked into the series and became the most hated by the audience. Maybe one of the most bitter things around Buffy the Vampire Slayer is this. Michelle Trachtenberg did not come into the series as an outsider. She came into it as a real fan. She loved that world before she ever got to become part of it. Sounds like a beautiful dream. But with Buffy, that dream came with a pretty rough collision. Dawn showed up like she had always been there, forcing herself right into a family the audience thought it already knew by heart. And that was exactly the problem. A lot of people did not hate Dawn just because she whined a lot or acted like a typical younger teenage sister. They hated her because she came late. She stepped into a world fans already felt belonged to them, then forced everybody to rearrange their memory. Fandom can be like that. It loves hard, and it defends its territory hard too. Number 7. Brendon's twin brother really did step into Buffy. Some facts about Buffy sound like something somebody made up after midnight, then the whole fandom kept passing around, just for fun. This one is not like that. It is real. Brendon had a twin brother named Kelly Donovan, and Kelly was not just some interesting little detail in the background of his biography. He really did step into Buffy, working as Nicholas's body double and stand in when the series needed a second Xander. And the best part is how perfectly it fits Buffy, almost too perfectly. This is a series obsessed with doubles' dark sides and versions of people that come out slightly wrong. Then, in real life, Xander actually had a flesh and blood double. The most famous case was obviously The Replacement, the episode built around Xander being split into two versions of himself. Honestly, even if you tried to invent a behind-the-scenes fact more fitting for Buffy than that, you probably could not. Number 6. Sarah Michelle Gellar hated laughing scenes. So, the writers made Buffy laugh. Even more, watch Buffy long enough, and you start to feel like Sarah Michelle Gellar could do almost anything. She could look so heartbroken it made the audience choke up too. She could toss out a sarcastic line as sharp as a razor. She could carry the whole apocalypse on her shoulders and still make you believe it. But there was one very everyday thing she was not comfortable with. and that was laughing. Based on what has been mentioned in the DVD commentary, Sarah did not like doing laughing scenes because she felt like her laugh looked fake, and that is where the story becomes very Buffy. Writer David Fury knew that, and instead of avoiding it, he wrote in even more moments where Buffy had to laugh just to mess with her. But trust me, that is only the last little wink before this list heads into the really heavy territory. Because from this point down, the 5 facts left are not just strange. They are the kinds of things that make the Buffy legend harder and harder to forget the more you hear them. Do not forget to hit the like button on the video and subscribe to the channel before we keep going through this list. Number 5. In the UK, Buffy once had 2 versions, airing at the same time. One of the creepiest things about television is not that it creates monsters. It is that it can quietly rewrite the audience's memory without them even realizing it. Buffy was like that in the UK. Same series, same characters, same title, but 2 different versions existed on the air at the same time. One cut down for an earlier time slot aimed at a general audience, and one late-night version that was fuller, rougher, and more truly Buffy. It sounds like a broadcasting technicality, but it is a lot more interesting than that, because it means some people grew up with a Buffy that had been softened, made less sharp, less dark, while other people remember a Buffy that was wilder, stranger, more grown up. In other words, even within the same generation of fans, memories of this series may not have matched from the very beginning. Number 4. Buffy's school was actually sacred ground for American teen movies. There are places in Hollywood that work harder and last longer than actors do, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer's school is one of them. To Buffy fans, it will always be Sunnydale High, where every hallway feels like it might lead straight down into the Hellmouth. But in real life, that school was Torrance High, one of the most familiar faces in American teen screen culture. It had already shown up in Beverly Hills 90210, then She's All That and Cursed too. In other words, before it became the land of the Slayer and vampires, that place had already been the stage for every kind of American youth story. What I have always found interesting is that Hollywood can take the same staircase, the same courtyard, the same row of hallways, then, with nothing but camera angles, lighting, and storytelling tone, turn it into a completely different world. Number 3. Buffy once had a ghost version. Buried for years before Buffy the Vampire Slayer became the Buffy a whole generation knows by heart, it existed like a ghost. Not a comic, not a remake, but a pilot from 1996 actually filmed yet never officially aired. Back then, Willow was not Allison Hannigan yet. The role was played by Riff Regan. Principal Flutie was a different face too. Even the school was still called Berryman High, not Sunnydale High yet. Everything looked close enough that you knew you were looking at Buffy, but wrong enough that it felt like standing inside a parallel universe. What makes this story fit Buffy even more is that the pilot was never officially released, but it kept living inside the fandom as a bootleg passed from hand to hand for years. And Joss Whedon did not want it properly released because he did not see it as the right version. And maybe that is exactly what made it so fascinating. Because before Buffy found its true shape, it had to pass through a version that was almost buried alive. Number 2. Buffy never wanted to be just a monster of the week. Show on paper. Buffy the Vampire Slayer sounds like the kind of television that is easy to package. One monster a week, one fight, one joke sharp as a knife, then next week you do it all again from the top. But that was never what this series really wanted to be. Joss Whedon said very clearly that he wanted his characters to change, learn, grow up, get hurt, and carry those consequences with them for years. In other words, Buffy did not want to live like a show with a reset button. It wanted to live like a long novel, and that is why this series stayed stuck in people's memory for so long. In Buffy, love does not disappear after the credits roll. Death does not get wiped clean in the next episode. Loss, betrayal growing up, and even the wounds nobody can see just keep piling up one season, pressing down on the next. I have seen a lot of series from that same era, but not many of them were brave enough to let characters carry the pain of one year all the way into the years after. And maybe that is exactly what makes the final fact so amazing. Are you ready to open it up? Number 1. Buffy went from an idea that sounded like a joke to an American TV legend. If you had told America in 1997 that a series called Buffy the Vampire Slayer would one day become a classic, a whole lot of people probably would have smirked. The title sounded weird. The premise sounded like some cocky little teen supernatural thing. It started on the WB, not one of the big network rating machines. On paper, Buffy looked like the kind of show that would spark curiosity for a while, then disappear like so many others from that era. But that is where Hollywood sometimes still creates one of its rare little miracles. Because Buffy did not just survive, it helped shape the identity of the WB, became a major asset for UPN, then later made its way onto the kinds of lists only truly lasting series ever reach. Time put it on the all-time 100 TV shows list. TV Guide ranked it among the biggest cult shows. The Television Academy recognized it with real Emmy wins and nominations. A series that once sounded like a joke somehow outlived a whole lot of shows that seemed more serious than it. Buffy started as a weird little gamble, then ended as part of an entire generation's memory. Looking back now, especially after someone like Nicholas Brendon has left us, what remains is not just vampires or the Hellmouth. What remains is the trace of a real legend. Looking back at Buffy the Vampire Slayer after Nicholas Brendon's passing, I think the thing that hits hardest is not just the sadness. It is the feeling that you opened up a familiar world. Again, then realized it was a whole lot more complicated than what you remembered from sitting in front of a small screen all those years ago. But strangely enough, the deeper I look, the more I love this show, not less. Because after all the cracks, Buffy is still something very rare. It still has a heart. It still has personality. It still has people who left a piece of their youth, their talent, and their very specific mark on every season. And to me, that is the most memorable thing of all. So what about you? Which fact surprised you the most? And if you want to keep going through classic movies and series this way, with me, stay right here with the channel.